Hi there again, everybody. Martin Lehner from Orange Technology, and in this video I want to talk about being situationally aware. So this is something that I find in the IT industry specifically, but I mean across many industries, that a lot of people don't really pay attention to or understand, and that's being situationally aware of what's going on around you in your particular spot or location or region or things like that. And I'll use an IT example. Again, this isn't just about IT. I mean, this spans any industry anywhere. But I will use an IT example. So, for example, bandwidth. So, for most of you who live down south, for those who live in metropolitan areas, for those of you especially in metropolitan and cosmopolitan U.S., you have no idea what I'm talking about. You won't have any concept of this. You won't understand the issues. Quite frankly, you'll probably be pretty surprised. But so where I live, and again, for those of you that don't know from previous videos, I live in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory. So that's in northern Canada. For those of you who don't know exactly where that is, we border Alaska. So Alaska's on this side, and we are on this side. So I'm pretty far north. I live in the capital city of the Yukon. We have a population of just under 30,000, so 28,000 and some. So we have all of our main services here. Internet-wise, we have one ISP. Currently, there is one fiber optic link that links us to the southern world. So one way to get out. We do have a terrestrial microwave network, but it can't handle all the capacity of all of our traffic, so we rely on one single fiber optic cable from one ISP. Last mile services, we've got cable internet services that exist here within the city. In the more rural areas of the Yukon, we have ADSL service. It's not as fast. The cable internet's a lot faster. Speed-wise, I mean, I have no huge complaints. I mean, I can buy up to, in my house, I can buy 150 megabits a second if I want. I can buy 100 megabits a second. I have 100 megabits per second in one of my office locations. So yeah, speed-wise, I don't really have any issues. It works well. The bigger issue is we have bandwidth caps. We have usage caps. So just for example, on the 100 meg service, I am paying, so for 100 megabits down, 5 megabits up, I am paying in the business $400 for that, $399.99 for that. So just shy of $400 per month, and I'm allowed 400 gigabytes of bandwidth. This is pretty expensive. For those of you down south, for those of you who have other service providers and other options and competition in your areas, you'll look at that and you'll say, wow, that's pretty expensive. And yes, it is. It is not cheap. But that's just something to think about. So I have a $400 a month package, and I get 400 gigs of usage. At my house, I have a whatever my house. I have it's just under $100. It's $79, $84. Anyways, it's just under $100. It's a 16 meg down service. If I remember correctly, it's 1 meg up. It's either 768 or 1 meg up. I don't remember exactly. But roughly that's what it is. And I get 110 gigs of usage per month. So that's for just shy of $100. I get 16 down, roughly 1 up, and 110 gigs of usage, which in reality isn't really that much. So when you guys down south, when you're talking about cloud services, cloud backup, cloud computing, Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, all these things, virtualized cloud database servers and things like that, that's great. But the problem for us here is our bandwidth is expensive, and we really can't afford to move a lot of traffic. I have one client that we recently brought on board that has Dropbox, okay, and they have 100 gigs in their Dropbox. It's a fair amount of usage. It's not huge, but I mean, it's 100 gigs, right? And if you think about it, if they add a new laptop, new desktop, whatever, to their network, and they have to sync that Dropbox account. That's 100 gigs that has to get synced as fast as possible because it'll just continuously download, right? So, in that particular business, their internet package, they have one below ours. So I want to say they get about 200 gigs a month included, 250. It's something around there. It's less than the 400 that I have in my office. So based on that, if they sync one computer, they're using half their bandwidth for the month just syncing that one machine, right? So when you look at these cloud services, when you look at anything you do on the internet, something that you guys in the South and metropolitan areas don't even think about, we have to think about up here because our situation that we have up here is not the same that you do. And this is one of those things about being situationally aware. I'll talk about another client. We had another client that we brought on board. And they brought us on board to do a rollout of a new network. The client was actually part of a larger business. It's not really a franchise, but you can think of it like a franchise. So they actually had centralized IT support out of the head office, which is in the South. It is actually in Toronto. And so they had designed this network. They designed it all out. They knew what they wanted. They sent some equipment up. Some equipment was sourced locally, et cetera, et cetera. And we were brought in to actually deploy it. So if you think of us, we were like the boots on the ground, right? So, which is fine. I mean, I have no issue with that. We do that for a number of clients. It works out fairly well. So what happened was we went and we installed all this equipment and we started to learn, because we weren't part of the actual planning process of how this network was going to look and how it was going to function. So we started to learn about how this was going to function, and we realized that most of the data and everything would have to be uploaded into a cloud service that would then be accessed from there and synced every night. So based on what this business was, I mean, I won't say what the industry was, but they dealt with large size files. So regularly they would have large size files that they would add into their storage every day. So I mean, if I had to guess on size, like this is probably several gigs a day worth of files that they were adding. Again, every single day they were adding. They generally weren't modifying, but they were adding. So based on this, I mean, first they had to do an initial upload of all the data, and then it would sync every day. And when we looked at it, and we looked at the size of data, we said you're going to pay a lot in overage. The overage right now is don't quote me, don't quote me, but if I remember correctly, it's $2.50 per gig when you go over your cap. So in this case, this particular client in the package that they were on, again, they were in one of those middle packages, so they're allowed around the 200 gig mark every month for data. And based on the estimates we were looking at, their first month alone, if they included the upload, was going to be, it was 400 or 500 gigs. It was quite a bit of usage. So I mean, that's, that gets kind of pricey. So anyway, so we started doing this rollout, and I actually at one point I realized that when we were talking to the head office folks and the IT folks there who had designed all this and were talking about it, I realized they didn't really understand what the internet service and packages were like up here. So I told them, I said, because I first realized this when they started to talk about how long it was going to take to upload all this data, and they were expecting it to happen like overnight. They were going to upload these hundreds of gigs overnight, and it would just be done. And I sat there and I told them, guys, this is going to take more than a weekend. Like, this is going to take probably a week of solid upload. And they looked at me funny, and they asked why. Like, can we not just do it as fast as possible? And I said, that is as fast as possible. Again, this particular internet package had roughly 1 meg of upload speed, and that's maximum a meg. That's not guaranteed, right? So cable internet is a shared service. For those of you that don't know, cable internet is a shared service. So when you purchase speeds, it is up to a certain amount. You get up to 100 megs down, up to 5 megs up. That is all dependent on what everybody else around you who is on the same node, the same central serving node that feeds all of the cable modems in your area, how saturated that is. So your speeds generally will be a lot faster at, say, 6 a.m. in the morning because everybody's sleeping and none of your neighbors are using the internet, as opposed to 8 o'clock at night when everybody's using the internet, streaming their Netflix, YouTube, whatever. So, based on that, I mean, we were talking about how long it would take theoretically on the maximum speeds. That's not exactly the same thing as real world. So when we started to talk about that, I realized these guys didn't understand the internet packages we have and what this particular office, this branch office, had. And then I asked them about the caps. And they said, caps? What do you mean caps? I said, well, we have bandwidth caps. You can't just use unlimited bandwidth. And they said, what? And truly, they did not understand that there were caps in place and that there was an overage fee for more. I guess in most of their locations, there is kind of a soft cap, but what the ISPs do in those locations is they just speed throttle you at that point. So they don't charge you for more usage, they just speed throttle you, which, I mean, it's an interesting concept. Again, I've never seen it in practice, so I have no idea how that works, but apparently that's what's done in their other locations. So they didn't understand that up here, it would actually cost money. And when they did the math, it was going to cost a lot of money in overages. So they put a halt to that part of the network deployment. We did a couple other things that we could still do. They redesigned it and they actually created local storage. So now this branch office or this office keeps all of their information locally here, but there's VPN access to it from outside if somebody's got to look at something, which I guess doesn't actually happen that often. They just prefer to have all the data in one place. But again, in this situation, that didn't work and did not make business sense. So that's one of those things for situational awareness that you really need to be thinking about. And it's really interesting because a lot of people don't think about that. They think really big scale. This is the cloud. This works everywhere like this. This is how it is no matter where you are on the planet. And that's just not the case. I mean, you look at things. I mean, even VPN connections, right? So VPN connections, static VPN connections. Hey, they work. They're great. They're tunnels. They're secure over the internet. Blah blah blah. You can connect up remote offices. That's all great. I mean, I've seen VPN connections with branch offices in use in southern metropolitan areas. And you know what? I mean, it's not bad. It's not super fast by any means, but I'm also not saying it's the best way to hook up an office. It is generally one of the more simpler ways, and if you have a smaller or organization, it's one of the ways that probably makes more sense than others, just from a cost perspective. But generally, it works fairly well. You come up here and you do a VPN between two local locations. It works fairly well too. I mean, I have it set up for a number of clients that have more than one office, and they have a VPN bridge between the two so they can access each other, and it works fairly well. There's no huge issues with it. Again, with upload speeds generally up here being a little bit lower than what you traditionally see in metropolitan areas, it's a little slower, right? But it works. For the most part, it works. Now, try putting a VPN in from up here down south to a metropolitan area. That's not the same thing. So now when you go down south to a metropolitan area, you have latency. There's increased latency. Now again, we have a fiber optic line that goes from here down south. If you guys want to look on a map, the fiber optic line goes from Whitehorse, basically down the Alaska Highway, and it comes out in somewhere around Grand Prairie, I believe is where it is, and it interconnects there with the local provider, who then moves the traffic further down south. The thing is, there's a number of services that actually reside in Vancouver. There are some VoIP services actually that reside in Vancouver that I have used in the past for clients and myself. When I ping those VoIP providers in Vancouver, because of the route that the traffic has to take, I'm getting, ping times anywhere from 80 to 100 milliseconds, which is kind of the upper level of where VoIP will work. Now, this solution technically did work, but it wasn't that reliable. So that's another one of those things you have to think about is, when you're building a solution that has to be geographically diverse, what is the situation on either end of that, and what's the situation between them? Because you might have 100 megs down, 5 megs up in one location. You might have 150 megs down and 20 megs up in the other location. You say, hey, that's great, no problem. But what's going on between the two, right? And that's really what you got to think about. You have to think about the entire situation. You have to be aware. You really have to be aware of what your situation is and what will impact it, right? So same thing, we have one fiber line. If I have a VPN here in Whitehorse and I have a VPN in Vancouver, they will work. But what happens if that fiber line goes down, that single fiber line? What happens if that single fiber line in the Yukon goes down, or that route along Alaska Highway? It actually goes through British Columbia and Alberta. But what happens on that line? A different thing will happen if that line goes down or is cut for some reason than if a fiber optic line is cut in Vancouver. Vancouver's a lot of redundancy, right? So they have multiple fiber optic lines, multiple routes they can take. They likely go south to Seattle. They likely go east across into Alberta. I'm guessing they probably go west into the ocean and they interconnect with some submarine fiber optic cables and things like that, right? I don't actually know a lot of the architecture that's down there. Obviously, that's not my operating area, but I would presume that that's what it looks like down there. So if you have a fiber optic cut on one cable down there, it will not affect things in the same manner as a fiber optic cut in my area. So that's really these are just examples, right? I have a lot more that I could share with you, but these are all examples on what you have to think about when you're developing solutions, when you're recommending things to clients, when you're looking to build something a certain way that, hey, may be a best practice or maybe the best way to do it somewhere else, in let's say a metropolitan area, but might not be the best up here, right? So, in my previous video, I talked a little bit about regulatory compliance. So this is the same thing, right? You have to be situationally aware of the regulations in your area and what you can do. Again, if you're in America and you want to put your data in Dropbox, that Dropbox stays in America. Dropbox servers are in America. Unless they've changed things recently, but last that I knew, and I did ask them, all their servers are in America, all the data is housed in America. So if you use that, that's fine. Whether you house it on your computer or your server on premise in, Cincinnati, Orlando, Los Angeles, wherever, right? That's in the US. If you host it on Dropbox servers, I don't know where they are, let's just say they're in Atlanta, it's still in the US, right? So situationally, that's no problem. You can do that. However, if you are in Canada and you keep all that information on Dropbox, now all of a sudden that information winds up being in the US. Jurisdictional problem, because there are different laws and legislation that govern electronic data that is stored in the US as opposed to the legislation and laws on the governance of electronic data kept in Canada. Not the same thing. So again, situationally aware. If you talk to somebody or you listen to somebody on YouTube, there's lots of tech professionals on YouTube that quite frankly give lots of great advice. I haven't seen anybody yet that I would say is giving bad advice on YouTube, at least not from what I've seen. I follow a few people on YouTube, so their advice is all pretty much good. But again, it's situational. So their advice is for their particular area. In most cases, these are people in the US, right? I'm just thinking Eli the computer guy is in the US. Louis Rossmann is in the US. The only one who I know of that's not is actually Linus Tech Tips. He's actually in Vancouver. He's actually out of Vancouver. So he's in Canada. So he would have a different perspective on things as opposed to somebody in the US, depending on the solution. And again, this is about situational awareness. Does this make sense and does this work in your area? And there are so many factors to consider. There's regulatory and legislative. There's functional. There's operational. There's theoretical. There's all kinds of things. For example, with us being here in the Yukon, I mean, we're not very far from Alaska, Skagway, Alaska, which is a tourist town basically. It's a gold rush era town. They generally have cruise ships in the summer that come by. So if you do an Alaskan cruise, generally they will stop in the port of Skagway. That's their main economy. There is based off of tourism from the cruise ships. That's only it's about 185 kilometers away. That's roughly about 115 miles around there. It's not very far. So really, like, America's not far from us whatsoever. So there has been talk about what could we do across the border? How could we share infrastructure? How could we particularly with internet and data and things like that, is there the possibility, because I mean they have limited bandwidth too, right? I mean, they're a small Alaskan town. I think it's a town of 2,000 people year-round population, something like that. It's not very big. They would love to be able to purchase bandwidth from us because comparatively we are a very large jurisdiction compared to them. If you've ever been to Southeast Alaska or you know anything about it, a lot of it is separated by water. So installing fiber optic lines is actually not that simple. Alaska Power and Telecom, AT&T, they have a microwave network across Southeast Alaska. That's how they service most of these smaller communities, because the business case just isn't there to drop in a fiber optic cable under the sea. That's not cheap. That's not cheap. If you think fiber optic cable on a road terrestrially is expensive, yeah, under the ocean, yeah, it's even more expensive. So they have a microwave network. But of course, I mean, wireless is great. I mean, it works for many situations. But of course, you have limited bandwidth, right? It's not that big. Fiber optic bandwidth there's really no limit at this point. They say it's basically future proof. Microwave has made quite a few strides in the past lately. But I mean, you're still limited, right? So based on that, they would love to purchase bandwidth from us. Comparatively, if you look at Vancouver and Seattle, I mean, that's having a link directly from Vancouver to Seattle for the purpose of sharing bandwidth is probably a crazy notion. I mean, if you asked anybody who works in the IT or even the telecom backbone field industries down there, they would probably tell you that's sort of a crazy idea. Why? We have more than enough bandwidth. Why do we need one between those two places? So again, it's situational, and you really have to think about that. So many IT professionals, so many people I see deploy solutions that this should work. I've been told by the manufacturer that this will work this way. And it's like, yeah, but where did that manufacturer test that out, right? Where? I mean, this manufacturer, for example, is based out of LA, or they're based out of San Francisco. Okay, well, they tested it in San Francisco. Maybe they tested it in New York. Maybe they tested it in rural Wisconsin, right? But that's still not the same as testing it in, say, the Yukon, or even more remote areas. I mean, if you go east, if you're looking at the map, so northern Canada is split up into three territories. So we have the Yukon, which borders Alaska, and then we have the Northwest territories, and then we have Nunavut. Nunavut's kind of on the east coast. Basically, if you think about it, roughly, if you go to New York and you go straight up, you'll reach Nunavut. You have to go west a little bit, but roughly that's what it looks like. For me, basically, if you go to Seattle and go straight up, that's kind of where I'm at. So geographically very separate. And if you go over into Nunavut, they don't even have a fiber optic cable. They don't have that at all. Everything is fed by satellite. To put this into perspective, the capital city of Nunavut is called Iqaluit, and they are fed completely by satellite. This is a city of, I believe it's 15,000 people, roughly, maybe a little bit less. But it is the capital city of that area, and they're fed strictly by satellite. Satellite internet, satellite phone service, everything over satellite. They don't have a fiber optic cable that goes there. Right? So quite frankly. It's nice. It's nice here because we do have a fiber optic cable. We only have the one, so when it gets cut, yeah, there's problems. But we do have a fiber optic cable. We are actually connected terrestrially with a cable, which is nice. Again, in Nunavut, they're stuck with satellite only. And you want to talk about limited bandwidth. You want to talk about limited bandwidth. Satellite is limited bandwidth. Very much so. So, again, so think about that. Something that will work here in Whitehorse, because we have fiber optic lines, because the latency is not that bad into the south, we can do things VoIP, right? Like we can do VoIP. We do have a local VoIP provider who actually has local VoIP service with equipment here. But I mean, aside from that, we can do VoIP, right? It works. For the most part, it's perfectly fine. You try to do that in Nunavut, the exact same system. You deploy the exact same IP phone system that you're deploying here in Whitehorse. That works, for the most part, no problem. People are happy with it. You deploy that same system in Nunavut and like in Iqaluit, and you will get a much different experience. It will not be the same thing. So again, based on that, even if a manufacturer comes and tells you, oh yeah, no, I mean, our VoIP system works everywhere, no problem. Will it work in that area? Has it been tested in that area? I've asked this question. I have asked this question to manufacturers. Have you tried this VoIP system on a community service by satellite only? And actually, I've had to repeat that a few times because they don't actually even understand. They actually say, well, for remote, for backup on satellite, yeah, you can do it, Not, obviously you normally want to plug into your DSL or your cable normally. And I go, okay, there's DSL in the area, but it's satellite only for backhaul. And they don't understand, right? I have to explain, there is no cable that goes to these locations. It is by satellite, right? The backbone, the infrastructure, people can get DSL modems in their homes or in their businesses. It's cabled, copper wire pair back to the central office, but then the central office is connected by satellite. There is no cable, there is no terrestrial microwave, it's satellite. And I've had to explain it different ways sometimes. And finally, when these manufacturers get it, they're like, oh, well, I didn't really know there were still places like that or that existed. And you go, well, then how do you know your solution works? And I mean, in some cases the solution does work, in some cases it doesn't. I mean, it's one of those things where, and I mean, I'll do another video about this, but you have to test. You have to test your solutions before you implement them. Situationally, if you design something and it looks like it should work and you think it should work, you still have to test it. You have to try it out, especially if you are in an area that is a little more unique. If you're in San Francisco and you're going to use a cloud service that is built by a startup, in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco, that's probably okay. You're probably safe deploying that without actually trialing it and testing it in your location to make sure, the connectivity's solid and all that. You can be reasonably safe. I'm not saying you shouldn't test. Don't get me wrong. You should always test before you put something into production because you never know if it operates like it's supposed to. You never know. But that being said, if you assume that it works and you just deploy it, in most cases, it probably will work, right? Because, again, it was tested and developed in that area, it's probably okay. That being said, if you are in a different area that it was not intended for or not developed or tested in, that's something you really need to test. That's not even a question anymore. If you are assuming it will work, quite frankly, in my opinion, you're not a very good IT professional if you're going to deploy something like that without knowing. It's just my opinion. So yeah, that was the gist of this video. Situational awareness, understand where you're at, understand what your solutions are, and think about them and vet them and make sure things are going to work for your area and your situation and your particular deployment or whatever you've got. Again, everybody is different. Everybody is unique. Especially for those of us who don't live in metropolitan areas that are a little bit outside of, the 99% or whatever. So yeah, that's what you really need to think about. So until next time, we'll see you guys later.